Audemars Glain was 40 seconds into the most important lie of his life when the house lights of the Mirror Exchange dimmed on cue, and a scale model of the Forbidden Border rose out of the stage floor on a brass column, black buoys strung across velvet dark like beads of obsidian, and 300 of the richest beings on Quorth Hub leaned forward in their seats at exactly the moment he had designed them to. There, Glain said, and let the words sit. 11 light years of silence, the only border in the charted galaxy that has never been filmed, not once. Not a frame. 2 centuries of rumor and not one honest picture, his frill lifted, slate gray and immaculate above the collar of a coat that had not been paid for. I am going to film it. And you, my friends, are going to own a piece of the most watched picture in the history of the civilized worlds. The lie was not the buoys. The buoys were real, and so was the silence behind them, and so was the human species that kept it, which the galaxy spoke of the way old sailors speak of weather that once killed everyone they knew. The lie was the document glowing on the screen behind him, a transit waiver bearing the seal of the Outbound Trade Bureau, certifying that the Glain Spectacle Combine held lawful permissions for a serve transit of the boundary approaches. There was no such permission. There was no such waiver. There was a forger named Brockle Naus who owed Glain 3 favors and had settled all 3 in one afternoon with a stylus and a stolen seal block. A claw went up in the 3rd row. Madame Yelleth Cror, who owned 1/3 of the hub's water and all of its patience. Master Glain, your last picture promised the galaxy a Leviathan. It did. The Leviathan was a barge hull dressed in grafted hide. Your own effects rigger sold the story to the Quorth Ledger for the price of a good dinner. Your investors lost everything but their dignity, and some of them lost that. A dry ripple of amusement crossed the salon. Why would any of us fund the man who staged the Ember Reach? Glain had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror for 6 nights, because the answer had to look like it cost him something. He let his frill drop. He let the silence go 1 beat past comfortable. Because I staged the Ember Reach, he said, and you all watched it anyway. 40 billion of you before the ledger spoiled the trick. You watched a barge in a costume because the galaxy is starving, madam. Starving for one thing it cannot buy at any price on any world, and that thing is an honest wonder. I gave you a fake one and you trampled each other to see it. He turned to the model, to the little black beads on their wires. Behind those buoys is the last true wonder left, the humans. The species every spacer's grandmother used to frighten her. The people who shut the door on the whole galaxy and never said why. I am done with costumes. I am going to point a lens at the one thing in creation that no one has ever dared point a lens at. And what it costs me to do that, I will pay. He spread his 4-fingered hands. I am not asking you to trust my honesty. I am asking you to trust my hunger. It has never failed you yet. He got the money. He had known he would get the money from the moment Cror asked her question instead of leaving, because an audience that heckles is an audience that stays, and an audience that stays is an audience that buys. What he had not planned for was the figure who came to the green room afterward without an appointment, while Glain's neck was still damp from the stage heat, a narrow drail in a clerk's gray coat, carrying a folio under one arm the way soldiers carry orders. Fine call-up, the clerk said, auditor to the House of Dree. The magnate took the largest share tonight, 11 million. I am the condition attached to it. I don't carry passengers. You carried a fake Leviathan, Collop said, without any heat at all. So you will manage. The magnate's terms are simple. I travel with the production. I see what the lens sees. I countersign the ledger every shooting day, and if the picture you bring back is another costume, the House of Dree takes the combine, the library, the name, and the coat you are wearing. The auditor's eyes were the color of wet slate. The magnate asked me to tell you one thing in person, she said. Bring me the monster, Glain. The galaxy has waited 200 years to see what the humans are hiding. Whoever shows it first owns a generation. She intends it to be her. Glain smiled with everything except his eyes. Tell the magnate, he said, that I never disappoint twice. That night, alone in an office stacked with unpaid invoices, he wrote the shoot board. It was an old habit from the carnival circuits where he had started, a brass-framed schedule of scene cards that traveled with every production he had ever mounted, and he wrote it the way he always wrote it, which was before anything on it had happened. 20 days. 20 cards in his own square hand. Day 1, the mutes, the black buoys, dread in the first frame. Day 3, the empty lanes, dead space where trade should be. Day 5, the dead fleet, because every rumor agreed there were wrecks in there somewhere, and wrecks were money. Day 8, first sign of them. Day 12, a human. He held the stylus over the last cards for a long while, listening to the hub's night traffic murmur under the floor, and then he wrote what the magnate had paid 11 million to read. Day 20, the monster. He looked at the board a long time. Some part of him, a small part that had once been a boy outside a panorama tent, observed quietly that he had now written a script for a place no living member of his species had ever seen. He told that part of himself what he always told it. The audience doesn't pay for what is there. The audience pays for what it came to see. The job is to make those the same thing by whatever means the budget allows. He crewed the production in 9 days, which would have been impossible for an honest man. The lensmaster took the longest. Glane wanted Pell Surveyne and no one else, and Pell Surveyne had not taken commercial work in 6 years. He found the Oct in a guild hall on the dockside levels, a heavy round-bodied being with banded eyes that saw, so the guild swore 11 layers of light where everyone else saw one. Pell shot funerals. Only funerals. State funerals, fleet funerals, the small drifting funerals of dock families who saved for a year to afford one reel of someone they loved going into the dark. Nobody staged anything at a funeral, Pell had told the Ledger once, in the only interview he had ever given. The light is honest because nobody can afford to lie in it. I know what you think of me, Glane said, sitting down across from him uninvited. You think a great deal about what others think of you, Pell said. His voice came from somewhere low in the round body, unhurried. It is the most honest thing in your pictures. I'm going across the hush line. The banded eyes turned, layer by layer, like a telescope being brought to bear. No one films the line. No one has tried with real glass and a real eye behind it. They send drones. The drones come back with fog. Everyone shrugs and calls it jamming. I am taking a ship, a crew, and the best living lens in the guild registry, and I am going to bring back the only true images in this whole sorry century. You can spend the rest of your life shooting grief, Sorvain. Or you can shoot the thing the whole galaxy has been grieving toward for 200 years and been too frightened to look at. Pell was silent for a long moment. You will want to fake it, he said, when it does not look the way you promised your investors. You will want to fake it because that is your whole grammar. I will not light a fake. Then keep me honest, Glane said, and knew as he said it that it was the single truest sentence he had spoken in a year, and hated slightly how easily it had come out sounding like a pitch. The presenter, by contrast, took one dinner. Vasht Oral was the most recognized voice in the spiral arm, a Sura whose throat sacs could put a tremor of doom under a grocery advertisement, and his career was at the precise altitude where legend begins to curdle into nostalgia. He had narrated the eruption of Thessaly, the funeral of 3 emperors, and lately, a documentary about cheese. Glane let him order the wine and then slid a single card across the table. It said a human, in square handwriting. On camera, Glane said. First voice in galactic history to say, I am standing in forbidden human space. Your voice. Aureli's sac swelled half a measure, which among the Sura is the equivalent of weeping at the opera. They'll revoke your licenses. Possibly your organs. They'll build statues of us. Both can occur, Aurel said and signed. The ship was called Ovation, and she was a converted exhibition barge with engines too large for her, which is to say she was exactly what Glane deserved. Her shipmaster, Captain Maru Tess, came with the hull, a flat-eyed Drail who had once run honest survey routes and now ran whatever cleared her debts, which the Ovation's previous 3 charters had not. She read the forged waiver twice, looked at Glane over the top of it, and said, This is paper. It is excellent paper. It will not stop being paper when a human picket reads it. There hasn't been a confirmed human picket sighting in 40 years, Captain. They don't patrol. They don't need to. The whole galaxy does their patrolling for them, in here. He tapped his own skull, just beneath the frill. Fear is the cheapest border in existence. I should know. I've sold it by the ticket. Tesk held the waiver out until he took it back. I'll fly your charter to the line and across it, she said, because the bank owns more of this ship than I do, and your money buys it back. But hear one thing. The hush line has eaten every fool that ever crossed it laughing. I've hauled freight along its rim for 9 years. The buoys don't transmit anything. No warning, no threat, no claim. You know what silence like that is in Deep Space Master Glane? It's confidence. I'd rather be shot at. The last hire was an accident. The apprentice's name was Omi Vida, a Tillich no taller than Glane's elbow, and she was discovered in the Ovation's hold 2 hours out from Korath, folded between film stock crates with a guild apprentice card in one hand, held up like a shield before anyone had asked her anything. Pell, it emerged, had signed her indenture that morning and not mentioned it to a soul. She loaded stock, logged exposures, and had memorized, apparently for love, the complete catalog of every image known to exist of human civilization, all of which predated the closing of the line, all of which together would not fill one reel. 12 verified photographs, she told Glane on the first night out, uninvited, vibrating slightly with the joy of being asked nothing. 9 from the trade era, 2 from the war congresses, 1 nobody can date. That's the whole archive, Master Glane, the whole species, 12 pictures. Do you know what that means? It means scarcity, Glane said. Scarcity means price. It means whatever we bring back will be most of what anyone has ever seen, Vida said. Forever, maybe. If the archive of a whole people is 13 pictures and we shot the 13th, we'd better not have lied in it. Glane looked down at the little creature for a moment and felt, for the second time that month, the faint vertigo of being told the truth on his own ship. He was not used to the sensation of standing at the edge of something genuinely larger than his appetite, and he resolved with practiced ease not to feel it again. The ovation made the crossing on the 31st night out from Korath, and Glane put it on the board as day 0, because a showman numbers everything and 0 is the most dramatic number there is. Tesk did it the way smugglers had whispered it could theoretically be done, the way nobody could confirm, because nobody who claimed to have done it could prove they had been anywhere at all. Twice a year, by some agreement older than anyone's grandmother and negotiated by parties no living official could name, a refuse convoy crossed the hush line outbound from human space. Sealed hulks of processed slag and spent cores, robotic, slow, utterly indifferent, the only traffic that ever crossed in either direction. The convoy's wake was 11 hours of sensor mud. Tesk tucked the ovation into that mud with her transponder cold and her engines breathing shallow, and the black buoys of the hush line drifted past the viewports one by one, close enough to read if there had been anything on them to read. The crew gathered at the saloon ports to watch, which Glane noted, because gathering is what audiences do. The buoys were each the size of a small warehouse, matte black, unmarked, and they did nothing. That was the thing the rumors never conveyed, Glane thought, watching the fourth one slide by in perfect silence. They did nothing at all. No light, no signal, no challenge. Hundreds of them, strung across 11 light years at intervals of a few 100,000 kilometers, doing nothing, forever, with the whole engineering weight of an unseen civilization implied behind the doing of it. Beautiful, breathed Oral, sax trembling, already narrating in his head. Confident, said Tesk from the helm, and did not breathe at all until the last buoy was astern. And then they were across, and nothing happened, and nothing continued to happen with such totality that it became its own kind of event. No alarm, no picket, no voice. The forbidden space of the human species opened ahead of the ovation's bow, exactly as black and exactly as quiet as the lawful space behind it, and Ottavir Glane stood in his unpaid coat in the saloon of a mortgaged ship, 11 million in debt to a magnate who wanted a monster, and felt the grin climb his face like sunrise. Note the date in the ledger, auditor, he said. Principal photography begins tomorrow. He went to the brass board and turned the first card face out. Day 1, the mutes. The card, like everything else Glane had ever produced, described a scene that did not yet exist. Unlike everything else he had ever produced, the place it described was already writing a different one. Day 1 went wrong by mid-morning, ship's time, and the manner of its going wrong was so quiet that at first nobody understood they were looking at the single most important fact of the expedition. Pell shot the buoy line astern for 6 hours from the dorsal blister with the good glass, the deep field stock, and the patience of a being who had spent 6 years filming grief without blinking. The mutes hung in his frames like teeth in a jaw. Vida logged 41 exposures, hand-carried the stock to the developing bay, and came back to the saloon an hour later walking the way crewmen walk toward captains when something is on fire. The frames were gray. Not fogged, the way light struck stock fogs, not jammed, the way drone returns from the line had always been dismissed as jammed. Each frame held its image for a breath when the lamp first hit it, sharp and whole and perfect, the buoys, the starfield, one corner of the Ovation's own hull. And then in the space of 3 heartbeats, the image faded smoothly to an even, mannerly absolute gray. Like breath leaving a window, Vida said. Like the picture had been lent, and the lender had thought better of it. They ran every test a guild lensmaster and a guild apprentice could run between them. New stock from sealed crates gray, different chemistry gray, digital backers, crystal matrix, optical drum. Gray, 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 each by its own pathway, image after image accepting the light, holding it just long enough to prove it had been captured fairly, and then declining, politely and without exception, to keep it. Sabotage, Glane said. By whom? Pell rumbled. I loaded half these myself. Vida sealed the rest on Korath under bond, and look. He held a strip to the lamp. The frames I shot inside the ship hold. They are the galley. See Orel's ridiculous breakfast, fixed and fast. The frames pointed out the port gray. The stock is fine, Glane. The stock works everywhere except at this place. That's jamming, field interference. Then it is jamming that can tell the difference between a breakfast and a boarder, Pell said, and chooses. The lensmaster's banded eyes turned through their slow layers, and for the first time since Korath, there was something in his voice that was not certainty. Instruments read clean, navigation reads clean. The comrade hears the convoy, the buoys, the void, everything a sensor is entitled to hear. Only the images die. Glane, I have shot light for 60 years. Light does not behave. Light cannot be governed. Whatever does this is doing something to recorded light that my guild does not have a word for. Into the silence that followed, small and clear and not at all afraid, Ome Vida said the word the rest of the voyage would be spent learning the size of. They do, she said, have a word for it. It's in the trade era fragments, the old diplomatic glossaries, the ones nobody reads because they're boring. The humans had a custom, before the line closed. You did not record a person without asking. Not a person, not their home, not their dead. The old envoys thought it was funny, a species of engineers with a superstition about pictures. There's a fragment where a human delegate explains it to a Quarith trade clerk who'd been filming the human shuttles without asking, and the clerk writes it down like a joke. She had it by heart, of course. She had everything by heart. The human said, an image taken without consent is a small theft of a person, and we no longer permit ourselves to be stolen. Permit? Glane repeated. The humans called the custom the courtesy, Vida said. The clerk thought it was a metaphor. I don't think it's a metaphor anymore, Master Glane. I think we just watched it work. I think they built it into the light. Glane stood very still for a moment, and the crew, who did not yet know him well, mistook the stillness for shock. Pell, who knew him better after 9 days than the others would after 20, watched the impresario's frill settle into the smooth, attentive curve it took when he was recalculating a budget, and understood with a sinking of all three of his stomachs that Ottavar Glane had just heard the most extraordinary fact of the century and filed it as an obstacle. All right, Glane said briskly. So the exteriors are a problem. Problems are line items. Orel, we shoot your stand-ups in the hold against black. We'll plate the backgrounds in post from the survey charts. Nobody in the back row of the galaxy will know the difference. Pell, I want every interior angle of this crew looking brave and underpaid. Vida, log everything that grays times distances. The pattern is data, and data is production value. A force field that censors cameras, that's not a setback, that's an act break. The humans guard their secret with sorcery no scientist can name. People will chew through the seatbacks. You're going to fake it, Pell said. Day one, I said you would, and you are. I am going to supplement it. You are going to dress a barge in a hide again. I am going to give the audience what the location refuses to provide, Glane snapped, and the salesman's warmth dropped out of his voice for the first time since Quarith, leaving something leaner underneath. I have 11 million of the House of Drees money sunk in a place that eats pictures, Sorvain. I have an auditor at my elbow writing down everything including, presently, this sentence, and a magnate at home expecting a monster. There is no version of this voyage where I return with 20 reels of polite gray and an essay about consent. So we will shoot what can be shot, we will build what cannot, and the seam will be invisible. Because I am very good at seams. Keep me honest, you said. Fine, keep the frames you shoot honest, the picture is mine. Fine Collop in the corner wrote in the ledger. Glane did not ask what. They went deeper. Day 2 and Day 3 on the brass board were the empty lanes, and for once reality cooperated, because the lanes were empty in a way that no set dresser could have improved. This had been trade space once. Vida's fragments said so, and the old chart said so. A corridor of way stations and beacon towns, a place where 4 species shipping had crossed human routes and human hulls, had been a common sight at dock, back when a human hull was a thing a being could see. Now the Ovation's instruments swept lane after lane and found them swept clean, not ruined, not derelict, tended. The way stations sat dark but whole, hulls patched, beacons capped, like lamps put away in a drawer by someone who expected, someday, to want lamps again. Tesk flew past the 4th one slower than she needed to and said nothing, and her silence was its own report. No wreckage anywhere, Vida said, reading the survey returns. 200 years and there's no junk. Every space lane in the galaxy is ankle-deep in junk. Somebody picks up after this whole place. 11 light years and somebody picks it up. Write that down for the narration, Glane told Orel. A silence with a janitor. No, a silence that is maintained better. It was on day 4, ship's evening, that human space spoke to them once in a voice like a tired harbor master and changed the temperature of the whole expedition. There was no contact alarm because there was no contact. Nothing approached. Nothing painted them. The comm board simply opened a channel on its own, every light going green at once as though the array had decided to cooperate with someone it liked. Better, and a voice came into the Ovation's bridge speaking flawless trade canon with an accent nobody living had ever heard, flat and unhurried and about as hostile as rain. Charter vessel Ovation. You crossed the hush line 81 hours ago in the wake of the waste convoy. You have been in our care since the 3rd buoy. This is the only courtesy hail you will receive, so attend. You are not in danger from us. You are in danger from the Carrant Shoal, which your charts mark wrong, because your charts are 200 years old. Alter heading to the vector now displayed on your navigation plot, and you will pass it safely outbound. A transit of 19 hours will return you to the line. We suggest you make it. Whatever you were paid, the picture you are imagining does not exist, and the one that does is not for sale. Good night. The channel closed. The navigation plot glowed with a courteous green vector, origin unknown, authority absolute. On the bridge of the ovation, nobody spoke for 5 full seconds, and then Glane said, in a hush of pure professional reverence, "Tell me we got that." They had got it. Vida had had the recorders running on the comm array since day 0. They played it back. All of them crowded into the bay, Aurelie's sack swelling at the sheer broadcast value of it. The first human voice heard in the galaxy in 2 centuries, captured clean on 3 redundant systems, and they listened to it twice. And while they were listening, the third time the recording faded under their hands. All 3 systems. The voice thinned midward like a tide going out, amiably without malice, leaving level gray silence and a time stamp. "Spoken to us," Pell said slowly into the quiet, "not to our machines. He talked to the people on this ship, and the moment we tried to make him a thing in a box, the box was emptied." "That is not a security system, Glane. A security system would have stopped the recording. This let us record, let us listen, let us understand, and then took back what was theirs. It's not jamming us, it's declining us." "It warned us about the shoal," Tesk said from the helm, not turning around. 81 hours in their care. They watched us cross, and their first word was a navigation correction. "Master Glane, in 9 years on the rim I have heard every story about what comes out of human space, and not one of those stories ever mentioned that it would be worried about our hull." She laid the green vector onto her board. "Recommend we take it." "We take it," Glane said, by way of day 5. "Glane, the shoal is on the vector, Captain, near enough." He said it himself, "The charts are wrong. Something is at current that 200 years of rumor calls the dead fleet, and the only voice in human space just confirmed there is something there worth steering around. We are not going home with gray reels and a good night. We pass the shoal, we shoot what can be seen with eyes if not with glass. Oral logs witness narration, that's testimony, that's admissible, that plays. Then the vector, then the line, then home before anyone official has learned to pronounce my name." He turned the brass card on the board so the whole bridge could see it. Day 5. The dead fleet. "Gentle beings, the man said we were not in danger from him. I have never in my life been offered a better insurance policy or a better Act 2. Even Pell could not entirely argue, and that, the lensmaster thought later, was the precise hinge on which everything afterward turned. That the human's first gift had been the truth, and Glane had spent it like money. The Carrant Shoal announced itself first on instruments, a vast smudge of gravitational rubble and radiation shadow where the survey charts insisted clean space ought to be, and then through the forward ports as a faint bruised glow across 2 degrees of sky, and then, as the ovation crept the last 1,000,000 kilometers on shallow engines, as what it was. They had all heard of the dead fleet. Every species along the rim had a version. The armada that went in and never came out, the 1,000 hulls the humans kept as trophies, the boneyard that proved whatever each teller needed proved. Glane had sold tickets against that legend his whole career, and standing at the saloon port with the glass useless in his hands, he understood, in the first fully honest moment of his adult life, that every version was wrong, and that the truth was worse for him than any of them, because the truth was not a spectacle, it was a grave. 9 ships hung in the shoal light in a long curved procession, bowed astern, like beads on an unseen wire. They were not warships. Even across 2 centuries and a species gap, nothing about those hulls said war. They were fat, gentle, enormous things, ring-spined and tank-bellied, built to carry soil and seed and air and several 100,000 sleeping families a very long way in great safety, and every one of them had burned. The fire was 200 years cold, but it was written on them stem to stern, the bloom shadows of it, the deep scorched troughs, hull plates peeled back in frozen petals around the wounds where the cascade had run from ship to ship down the convoy's spine, faster, the old fragment said, than the convoy could scatter, in front of the whole watching galaxy. And they were polished. That was the thing the legends had never once imagined, and the thing Glane knew no audience would believe without proof he could not capture. The 9 hulls were burned and broken and kept. Every petal of ruined plate gleamed dustless. The long scorch troughs were clean as ceremonial brass. Among and around the great wrecks moved small steady lights, dozens of them, hundreds, patient as insects in a garden, tender craft no bigger than the Ovation's launches, dressing the dead ships the way honor guards dress a tomb. And strung between the 9 hulls, on actual physical cable, kilometer after kilometer after kilometer, hung lights the size of doors, each one burning a soft amber, each one, Vida confirmed in a whisper with the telescope at maximum and her voice coming apart, inscribed. "Their names," she said, "Master Glane. The lights are names, 26,000 of them." Aurelie began very quietly to narrate, the legendary voice moving on pure instinct while his sax trembled, and what came out of him was not the script. The script, which Glane had written in his office on Quorith, called The Dead Fleet, the Galaxy's Most Terrifying Secret, the Slaughtered Armada of the Silent Zone. What the most recognized voice in the spiral arm actually said, while the name lights of Carent drifted across the dark, was, "I was sent here to find a monster. There are children's names on these lights. There are so many. Cut, I can't. Give me a moment. Cut." The recorders for once did not gray. There was nothing in the frame but the crew of the Ovation, their faces at the port, and the light on them. That image held. Vida logged it with shaking hands. Exposure 181 of the voyage. Interior, the crew of the production watching Carent. The only honest frame, Pell would say later, that the expedition had yet produced, and no one in it had performed anything. It lasted perhaps 10 minutes, the silence, the awe, the involuntary reverence of beings standing at the edge of someone else's oldest wound. History should record, because the Ledger of Fine Collop does record, that it was Ottavar Glane who ended it. "All right," Glane said, and his voice was not cruel, which was somehow the worst of it. It was gentle, regretful, and entirely decided. The voice of a being doing arithmetic he wished came out otherwise. "This is the picture. This what is in your faces right now, grief and lights. That is Act 3, and I will build the whole cathedral around it. But faces at a window don't carry a premiere, my friends, and the frames of the fleet itself are gray. And an audience that is told about 26,000 names will weep, but an audience that is shown a threat will pay. We need the monster. We have the grave. A grave implies a weapon. The weapon is the story, so." He turned from the port, brisk again, and began assembling the lie with the speed of long practice. Nous, the pyrotechnic rig, the plasma bloom kits, the big ones from the Ember Reach inventory that we never declared. We stage a near miss off the shoal's edge. The Ovation runs. Something vast and unseen pursues. Fire across the dark behind us. Real fire. Real hull shake. Real terrified faces. All of it shot interior where the frames hold. We never show the pursuer. We never have to. Carent is the proof. The audience's own terror does the compositing, and not one frame is fake because every frame is real fire and real fear. It is the most honest, dishonest thing I have ever designed. Pell, you'll shoot it, because the alternative is that I shoot it without you. In the long pause that followed, the lensmaster's banded eyes turned through all their layers, once like a lock being tested and found, to its own grief, still fastened. "You stood at this window," Pell said, "and saw the names, and your answer is fireworks. My answer is solvency. The names will be in the picture. I am not a barbarian. But they will be in the picture that gets seen, which means the picture that gets funded, which means the picture with a monster in it, and if the humans wanted a different story told about this place, Sorvain, then they have had 200 years to come out and tell it." He was already walking. Nous, 4 hours. Riggett, Brockle Nous, forger, fixer, rigger of Leviathans, who had been silent since the names came into view, looked once at the amber lights strung between the dead ships, and once at the man who paid him, and went, as he'd always gone, to settle the favor. It is the kind of detail that ledgers preserve and legends do not. That the last entry in Collop's day record for Day 5 reads, "In a clerk's passionless hand, effects inventory unsealed against my advice. All parties advised. Shoot scheduled for Day 6, first watch." The auditor closed the book, and the Ovation hung in the grave light of Carent with fireworks in her hold. And somewhere beyond the shoal, in the deep of their own silence, the people who had been watching since the third buoy watched this too. Day 6, first watch. The brass board said the pursuit, and for 19 minutes it was the best footage Ottavar Glane had ever produced. Nous had outdone himself. The rig was a daisy chain of plasma bloom charges deployed on autonomous sleds, sequenced to detonate in a rolling line astern of the Ovation as she ran. Each bloom vast, violent, and gorgeously shapeless, fire without an author, the suggestion of something enormous breathing down a fleeing ship's neck. Tesk flew the run under protest so formally worded that Collop entered it in the ledger verbatim. Orel was strapped to the command base with his sax at full tremor, narrating live. "Something has seen us. Whatever guards the graves of Carent has seen us, and we are running for our lives." Pell shot it all interior, the lurching deck, the bloom light flooding through the ports in waves of feral orange, Vida thrown against a bulkhead with her log still in her hands, real fire, real hull shake, real fear exactly as designed, and every frame held, because every frame contained only themselves and their own lie. The 19th minute, the shoal reached out and made the lie true. The fault, the inquiry would eventually agree, was not the rig. The rig performed to specification. The fault was the chart, the 200-year-old chart, the one the tired harbor master voice had told them on Day 4 was wrong, and which Glane had used anyway to plot the stunt corridor, because the green human vector lay 40,000 kilometers off the spectacular backdrop of the wrecks and fire photographed against nothing is just fire. The corridor crossed a gravitational rip the old chart smoothed over. The seventh sled hit the rip, slewed, and detonated its bloom not astern of the Ovation but abeam, close, and the bloom's edge took the ship across her port quarter like an open hand. What Pell's running camera preserved of the next 90 seconds, interior unfaked and held by every system aboard, was this: the deck heaving, the saloon ports going white, then black, then Orally's narration dissolving into the wordless honking of a terrified Sura, Tesk's voice, flat as gauge glass, calling the cascade as it ran through her ship, plasma feed, port nacelle, fire suppression failed, and Brockle Naus, who had built the lie and knew exactly which of its bones had broken, unstrapping himself from a live station and going aft, into the burning nacelle ring with a manual cutter in each hand, to sever the feed lines by muscle before the cascade reached the main reserve, which held enough plasma to do to the Ovation what an engine fault 2 centuries ago had done to 9 gentle ships in front of the watching galaxy. He severed them. The cascade starved and died 11 meters short of the reserve. The Ovation lived. They found the fixer in the cooled wreckage of the ring an hour later, and there was no version of him to rescue. Collop's ledger for day 6 carries the only obituary Brockle Naus ever received, one line, in a clerk's hand that pressed hard enough to emboss the following page. Inventory. 1 effects rigor, expended preventing the production from becoming its own subject. The ship was alive but maimed, the port nacelle slagged, main power browning out in slow waves, attitude control answering like a drunk. The shoal's rip currents had her, and Tesk announced, with 9 years of rim running behind the flatness of it, that they were being drawn, gently at present harmlessly, but without any means aboard of preventing it, deeper into the Carrant Shoal toward the graves. Send the distress, she said. On what channel? Glaine's voice had gone thin. Somewhere in the last hour his coat had been burned along one shoulder and he had not noticed yet. To whom? We are 11 light years inside a border that officially eats ships. Nobody is coming, Captain. Nobody knows we exist. They told us they've had us in their care since the 3rd buoy, said Vida, from the deck where she sat holding her exposure log against her chest like a child. Care was the word. Send it in the clear, Captain. Just say it plainly. Say it like you'd say it to a harbor master. Tesk opened the channel in the clear and said plainly, "This is the charter vessel Ovation. We are holed, burning, and drifting into your graves. There are 14 souls aboard and 1 dead man who died well. We have no right to ask. We're asking." The reply took 4 minutes, and it did not come in words. The reply was that the rip current released them, smoothly all at once like a grip unclosing, and the Ovation came to rest relative to the shoal, as though a hand had been laid flat on her spine. Then lights, hard and white and many, rising out of the shoal's bruised glow from a bearing where the instruments swore there was nothing but rubble. Hulls, fast, plain, unadorned. Built with the heavy, unanswerable simplicity of working boats. No banners, no threat displays, no hail. Human ships, under no obligation to be beautiful, came across the dark like the fact of gravity. And the galaxy's first sight of them in 200 years, through the Ovation-scorched ports, was a rescue formation. What followed went into Collop's ledger in the dry tongue of audit, and even in that tongue it reads like weather. Boarding effected at 0341, all airlocks simultaneously, no door forced. Every lock cycled by override codes our own builders do not possess. Casualty teams aboard within 90 seconds carrying our atmosphere mix, our medical standards, our dietary tables. They knew the crew complement. They knew the species manifest. They knew where the injured were before being told. Firewatch posted on the slagged ring. Structural jacks placed at 4 points a survey would have needed a day to choose. At no moment did any of them touch a camera, a reel, or the strong room, and at no moment did any of them ask what we were doing here. It was somehow understood by every member of this crew, without a word exchanged, that they had known what we were doing here since before we knew ourselves. They were people. That was the indecent, unbroadcastable secret at the center of the forbidden zone, and the Ovation's crew absorbed it in silence while being competently saved by it. Not giants, not wraiths, not the faceless hypothesis of 2 centuries of frightened folklore. People in worn work gear with tools on their belts of assorted sizes and ages who moved through a burning stranger's ship as though tending strangers were a trade with its own old guild. One of them, a broad gray-bearded man securing the nacelle ring, was heard to mutter at the slagged feed lines in the tone every engineer of every species reserves for amateurs. Another, a young woman with burn scars of her own along one arm, sat with Vida, who could not stop shaking, for 20 minutes and never once said anything at all, which was precisely correct. And one of them was Provost Captain Adai Holt. She came aboard last with no escort, a compact woman of 60-odd standard years in a coat the color of deep water, gray at the temples, a long-heeled scar through one eyebrow, carrying nothing but a slate. She stood in the Ovation's scorched saloon and looked for a moment, not at the crew but at the brass chute board on the wall, where where the cards still read in square optimistic handwriting day 8. First sign of them, day 12, a human day 20. The monster and the crew watched her read it, and there are silences that perform an autopsy, and this was one. Which of you is Glane, she said. It was not really a question. I am. He had recovered the coat, the posture, most of the voice. Ottavar Glane, of the Glane Spectacle Combine. Provost Captain, my crew owes your people 14 lives, and I am not too proud to say that I owe you a debt that. Stop, Holt said without raising her voice, and he discovered that he had. She studied him for a moment, unhurried, the way the gray-bearded engineer had studied the feed lines. You'll want to know the shape of things, so here it is. Your dead man is being treated with respect. Your ship can't make the line on her own power. We'll bring her to anchorage at Carrot Watch, and our yard will put her right. Your people will be housed, fed, and left their dignity. Nobody will question them, nobody will touch your cargo, and when the ship is sound, you'll be escorted to the hush line and put across it, all of you, alive, with everything you brought. She let that sit precisely as long as it needed to, including, Master Glane, every reel you've shot. We don't confiscate, we never have. 60 crossings in 200 years, and the galaxy has never noticed the one thing all 60 had in common. Everyone goes home, and everyone goes home with their footage. Gray, Glane said. Gray, Holt agreed. What's ours stays ours. That's the whole of the law you've been inside since the third buoy, and it enforces itself, so you needn't bother testing it further, though you will. There was no rancor in it whatsoever, which made it worse. She turned to go, then paused at the saloon door and looked back, not at Glane but at the board at day 20, the monster in its little brass frame. One more thing since you came so far to learn it, she said. There's no monster, Master Glane. There never was. The thing behind the line that your whole galaxy has spent 200 years inventing teeth for, you stood at your window last night and looked straight at it. It's a grief. We keep it lit, and we don't sell tickets. She nodded once, like a harbor master logging a vessel in. Welcome to human space. You're the first audience we've had in 200 years, and you'll be the last, so pay attention. Carrot Watch was not a fortress. That was the second indecency. 200 years of folklore had built the humans a skull keep at the heart of the Forbidden Zone, and what rode at anchorage in the shoal's lee was a harbor, a sprawling, patched, working station the shape of a thing that had grown rather than been designed, ringed with yard gantries and tender docks, hung with actual laundry in one rotational section that Orel stared at for a full minute without his voice working. Lights everywhere, warm and unfortified. Children existed on it. The crew heard them before they saw them. Somewhere down a curved residential street, the eternal interstation sound of a ball being kicked against a bulkhead and an adult voice promising consequences. It smelled of bread, machine oil, and growing things. Some 4,000 humans lived and worked at Carrot Watch, and their work, as it had been for 200 years, in rotating crews drawn from every district of human space as an honor and a duty, was the keeping of the graves. The Ovation's crew came aboard as castaways, which is the oldest sea law in any species books, and were treated to the letter of it. They were housed along a quiet gallery overlooking the yard where their ship hung in a cradle of light, being mended by people who whistled while they cut steel. They were fed at a common refectory where the food was plain and very good, and nobody stared, which, Vida pointed out in a whisper, was its own miracle of discipline, since the humans had not had an off-worlder to stare at in living memory. They were assigned a liaison, a courteous, unbearded young provost named Ellen Dre, who answered every question that had an answer and declined the rest with the same 5 words, "That's not mine to give," until the phrase took on the quality of a wall, smooth, kind, and load-bearing, and on the 3rd day at anchorage, the humans buried Brockelnaus. Nobody had asked them to. Tesk had inquired awkwardly about cold storage and repatriation of remains, and Ellen Dre had looked at her with genuine puzzlement and said that a man who died putting himself between a fire and other people's children did not wait in a drawer at Carrot. That wasn't how the watch was kept. And so the crew of the Ovation found themselves standing in the long viewing gallery of a tender craft, dressed in borrowed morning gray, cut overnight to fit 4 different species, while the humans of Carrot Watch, who had never met Brockelnaus and owed him nothing, did the thing they did better than any people in the history of the void. They took him out to the graves. The tender flew the full length of the Garland procession, slowly all 9 ships, and as it passed, the namelights came up one section at a time in a tide of amber, 26,000 names burning brighter for the length of his passage, and at the procession's end, where the 9th ship's bow looked out into open dark, they set him among his own new light. The light was already inscribed. They had cut his name in 2 scripts, his own and theirs, and beneath it, in trade cant, 6 words, he put it out: "Go rest." A human woman with a voice like the harbor master's sang something brief in a language the courtesy did not bother to take back, because no recorder aboard was running, because Pel Sorvain, for the first time in 60 years, had left the glass in its case. He stood at the gallery rail with his banded eyes wide open in the amber light, doing the thing he had told the ledger no one could afford to do at a funeral, and when Omi Vida slipped her small hand into the fold of his arm, he said very low, in the voice of a being rearranging the foundations of a long life, "I have shot grief on 40 worlds. I have never once been allowed to simply attend it. Look what they keep, little one. Look what they spend it on. The galaxy fears the only people in it who finish their mourning." Ottavor Glain stood 3 places down the rail, and what he felt, watching 26,000 lights honor his forger, was unsaleable and enormous and aimed directly at him, and he could not afford it. So he did what he had always done with the truth. He began calculating its retail price. That night, alone in his quarters, he unpacked the concealed lens. It was a beautiful instrument, gild-built, the size of a coat button, and it had cost more than the Ovation's monthly mortgage. He had carried it through the crossing sewn into the collar of the unpaid coat, against exactly this contingency, because a showman plans for the failure of his, permits the way a captain plans for the failure of his engines. For 4 days at current watch, he wore it through the refectory, the yard galleries, the curved street where the ball thumped against the bulkhead, the long amber view of the graves. He recorded the laundry and the bread lines and the children's voices, the gray-bearded engineer laughing at something with his whole chest, 2 old humans playing a board game in a window, the patched working heart of the most feared species in the galaxy at its evening rest. 40 hours of it. The monster's lair, domestic, unguarded, and absolutely priceless. Every evening he decanted the take to the strong room reels, and every evening it lay in his hands, sharp and whole, for the length of 3 heartbeats and went gray. On the 4th evening, he did not stop at the gray. He sat in his quarters with the dead reels stacked like coins and worked the problem the way he had worked every problem since the panorama tense, with total, humorless focus, and he established methodically what 60 crossings in 200 years had each established alone in the dark and never been believed about. That the courtesy was not a field, not a broadcast, not a property of space that could be shielded against, because he tried shielding, not a function of distance because he tried range, not fooled by relays, copies, transcription, or hand-drawing from memory onto film, which last discovery cost him an hour of careful sketching and left him staring at a sheet of gray pencil fog that had, minutes before, been a quite passable likeness of the refectory. The images did not fail. They were withdrawn. Consent was the variable. There was no other variable. The knock came while the last reel was still graying, and he knew before he opened the door that it would be her, because the timing was too good to be anything but a lesson concluding on schedule. Aday Holt stood in the gallery light with her slate under her arm and looked at the stacked dead reels, and at the button lens on the table, and at him, and the worst of it again was that there was nothing in her face that he could have performed against. No triumph, no anger. Something nearer to recognition, as though a long-expected freight had arrived on its listed day. "Every crossing does this," she said. 60 out of 60. The smugglers try the strong room, the spies try the relays, and the showman, Master Glain, the showman always try the button in the collar. You held out 4 days. That's the longest any of your profession has lasted, if it helps. It doesn't. He stood aside, an admission of something, and she came in and sat, unhurried, in the chair across from the dead reels, a 60-year-old woman with a scar through her eyebrow, at ease in the quarters of the man who had come to sell her species by the ticket. "Ask it," she said. "You've earned the question that's been eating you since the funeral. Ask it plainly, and I'll answer it plainly. That's the custom here. We're not a riddling people. You've noticed we are not monsters. You've seen the yard and the bread and the children, and you've understood, because you're not a stupid man, only a starving one, that none of this needed to be hidden, that the galaxy would have wept and embraced us if it had ever seen 1 hour of your 40. So ask the question." "Why," Glain said, "why the line? Why 200 years of silence that lets the whole galaxy believe in a monster, when the truth would have bought you anything? Sympathy is currency, Provost Captain. It is the strongest currency there is. I've built a career on it. You're sitting on the richest vein of it in the charted void, and you've fenced it, often salted the ground, and I don't understand, and it is keeping me awake nights." "I know," Holt said. "It kept all 60 awake. Here it is, then." She set the slate down on the table between them, dark, and did not once refer to it, because the people of the watch carried this the way Vida carried her catalogs, by heart. 206 years ago, the convoy we call the Long Garland, 9 ships, 26,040 souls, families mostly, bound to open a world we'd been promised, was waiting for them, suffered a feed cascade in the third ship at the edge of the shoal you nearly died in. The same fault that nearly took yours. Fire jumped the convoy spine faster than they could scatter. It burned for 11 hours. You've seen what 11 hours did. Her voice did not change registers at any point in this. The watch did not perform its grief for visitors. Here is what your histories don't carry, because the licenses that would have carried it were bought and sealed. We were new to the lanes then, Junior, liked the way a clever apprentice is liked, and our distress calls went out in the clear on the common channels, 11 hours of them, position, vector, casualty counts, our rescue fleet begging right-of-way through 6 jurisdictions. Every broadcast combined on the rim heard those calls, Master Glane. We know precisely how many, because we have the logs of what they did next they came. Not the rescue services. Those were tangled in transit rights arbitration for 9 of the 11 hours, and that, at least, was only cowardice and paperwork, and we forgave it long ago. The combines came, survey yachts, press cutters, and then the barges. Pleasure barges, Master Glane, your industry's finest, sold out in 4 hours. Viewing berths at the Carrant Shoal while the third ship was still burning with its families in it. They arrived faster than anyone in the history of those lanes had ever arrived anywhere, and they parked at the minimum legal distance in a grandstand crescent 2,000 kilometers long. And they filmed our children burning, live, on 19 channels, with narration. And when our fleet finally cut through and reached the convoy, the first thing our rescue crews saw, coming out of jump with their boats already launching, was the light of the grandstand. They thought it was survivors' beacons. They steered for it. The room was very quiet. Somewhere below the gallery, faint through the deck, the evening sounds of Carrant Watch went on, the yard, the street, the thump of the ball. The most watched hour in galactic history, Holt said. That's what your trade still calls it. In the textbooks of your guilds, I'm told, as a milestone of reach. 26,040 people, and the galaxy's lasting contribution to their deaths was a rate card. Afterward, there were auctions, hull fragments. Personal effects? Recovered by salvage claim and sold by lot. A child's shoe with provenance documents, Master Glane, certified genuine garland. We're touring panoramas. There were for 40 years anniversary specials. She paused and looked at him, and the look was a door opening onto something he had spent 4 days refusing to see the shape of. You'd know about the panoramas. Provost Captain. The combine you inherited was founded by your grandsire on the proceeds of 3 tent panoramas, she said without cruelty, with terrible bookkeeping precision, the largest of which was titled The Burning Garland, an astonishment in 5 lights, which toured 118 worlds across 30 years and seeded, in aggregate, just over 2 billion beings. We hold its license records. We hold its ticket counts. We bought its master reels back in the 3rd buyback wave, along with everything else, every frame, every claim, every certified shoe at full asking price from every combine and every estate, and it took us 60 years and a measurable fraction of our species' total output. And when we owned the last of it, all of it, free and clear, we brought our dead home, we built the lights you saw, we posted the buoys, and we closed the door. We never fired a shot. We never sanctioned a world. We never named the guilty, though we could recite them. And now you may understand, Master Glane, why nobody sane crosses the hush line. Not because we are hiding a monster, but because the galaxy, in the marrow of its bones, in the part of it that does not believe its own folklore, has always remembered exactly what it sold us, and could never quite believe we wouldn't someday open the account. She rose. At the door she paused, the slate back under her arm, and her voice, for the first time, gentled by perhaps a degree. The line isn't a wall, whatever your charts call it. It's a courtesy, the same one that grazed your reels. The galaxy demonstrated, on the worst day we ever had, what it does with our image when we are not consulted, and so it is no longer consulted us it gets. We are not punishing you, Master Glane. We are declining you. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole of what we are, and in 200 years, you are the first member of your profession to stand where you are standing and hear it said plainly. She regarded him a moment longer. I'm told your rigger turned and went into the fire without being ordered. The yard says your ship will be sound in 6 days. Think about what kind of picture a man could make, who knew everything you now know, and had the only working footage in the galaxy of his own crew's faces at the window when the names came up. You came here to show them a monster. You could be the first one in 2 centuries to go home and show them a mirror. She left. Audemars Glane sat for a long time among his gray and worthless treasure, and the part of him that had been a boy outside a tent, taking coins from beings queuing to be astonished by the burning of other people's children, sat with him, and for the first time in 50 years he could not get it to stop talking. It was Aurel, of all of them, who broke first and broke upward. The presenter had been quiet since the funeral, his sack slack, his famous voice unspent, and on the 5th day at Anchorage he came to the refectory table where the crew sat and laid down, in front of Glane, the script, the real one, the one from Quorith, the one with the monster in it. He had carried his sides with him for 40 years, every production, the talisman of a working voice. He put them on the table with the gesture of a man laying down a uniform. "I've narrated 3 emperors into the ground," he said. "I gave the eruption of Thessaly its adjectives. I am, by any reasonable accounting, the most trusted voice in the spiral arm, and do you know what I have understood? Sitting at anchor in the place I was hired to slander? I have spent my career being trusted and never once been honest. They sang one verse over our rigger and put his name in their sky, and I have been narrating, Glane, my whole life. I have never once attended." The sacks filled slowly with something that was not performance. "I'll cross the line home with you because my contracts require it, but I will not read this. Find a voice for your monster somewhere else. The going rate for mine has changed, and the new price is that the words have to be true." Collop wrote it down. Collop wrote everything down. The auditor's gray presence at the table's end as constant as a bulkhead, and it occurred to Glane, watching the stylus move, that he no longer had any idea whose side the ledger was on, and that this was the first production of his life on which the question had ever mattered. The days at Anchorage that followed rearranged the crew of the Ovation one being at a time, quietly the way a tide rearranges a shore, and Collop's ledger kept the account of it with a fidelity that the courts of 3 jurisdictions would later read like scripture. On the 6th day, Glane tried to buy it. He had recovered by then, or believed he had. The night with the gray reels had been filed, in the architecture of his self-regard, as a setback survived, and what a showman does with a setback is reprice. He requested, through the courteous liaison Elendray, a hearing before whatever authority at Carrant Watch could bind an agreement, and to his surprise he got one. A plain room off the harbor offices, a long table of actual wood, and 5 humans of the Watch Council, work-dressed, unhurried, with Provost Captain Holt seated at the end taking, of all things, handwritten notes. He gave them the pitch of his life. He was honest, which was his innovation for the occasion. He had decided, walking there, that honesty was the only currency these people accepted, and he spent it like a man who had just discovered the denomination. He told them what the galaxy believed about them and what it would pay to believe something true instead. He offered license terms no broadcast combine had ever offered any subject. Full approval over every frame, human editors embedded at every stage, ownership of the masters vested at Carrant in perpetuity, and a royalty structure that would, he observed accurately, make the Watch the wealthiest institution on the rim inside a decade, all of it for one sanctioned reel, 1 hour, of the harbor, the yard, the bread, the children's ball game, the ordinary mortal truth of them. "You have been slandered for 2 centuries, he finished, and I am offering you the instrument of your own vindication on your own terms, every term yours. Name the condition I have not thought of, and I will meet it before you finish naming it." The council heard him all the way through. That was the thing he could never afterward make beings from the lawful galaxy understand. They did not interrupt, they did not confer, they listened with the whole of their attention, the way the rescue crews had boarded. And when he was done, the eldest of them, a stooped brown woman with shipwright's hands whom the others called Mara, looked at him with something that was almost unbearably kindness, and said, "Son, you've mistaken the disease for the cure. We don't doubt you'd keep every term. We don't even doubt the picture would be beautiful. But vindication before an audience is still a performance for that audience. And the moment we need the galaxy to see us truly is the moment the galaxy owns us again, 1 frame at a time. We learn that the hard way, at the highest tuition ever paid. We don't need to be seen truly, Master Glane. We need only to be left whole, and we already are." She folded her shipwright's hands. "The answer is no. It will always be no. You may stay to dinner." He stayed to dinner. The ledger records that, too, and records that he was quiet through it and ate little, and watched the council members argue warmly among themselves about a yard scheduling dispute and a daughter's apprenticeship and the proper way to season a stew, the most feared beings in the charted galaxy, and that afterward he walked the curved residential street alone for a long time, past the lit windows, like a man taking inventory of a warehouse he had just learned held nothing he could carry. On the 7th day, the humans asked permission of Ome Vida. It happened in the refectory, in front of everyone. A human girl of perhaps 10 standard years, an apprentice of the yard school with a drawing slate under her arm, presented herself at the crew's table with the gravity of a delegation, performed a small bow of the kind evidently taught for formal occasions, and asked the little Tillich archivist, in careful trade cant, whether she might make a drawing of her, because she had never seen anyone like her, and her instructor said the proper way to begin was to ask, "Vida, The being who had memorized 12 photographs because they were all her civilization had ever taken of an entire species, sat absolutely still for 3 seconds, and then said yes in a voice that came out smaller than she was, and sat for the portrait with her hands folded, while the refectory went on around them, and the girl drew with her tongue between her teeth. And when it was done, the girl turned the slate around and asked, because this too was evidently taught, whether Vida was content with it, and whether she might keep it. That's the whole custom, Vida said that night, in the gallery quarters, to no one in particular, her voice still not entirely her own. I've been calling it a technology for days. The gray, the buoys, the plate physics. I kept hunting the mechanism, and the mechanism is a child being taught to ask a stranger first. Everything else they built is just the asking, made large enough to hold a border. Do you understand what I'm telling you? We crossed 11 light years to photograph a fortress, and the fortress is a manners lesson with engineering behind it. On the 8th day, Tesk disappeared into the yard. She was found when Ellen Dre went looking 11 meters up a gantry alongside the Ovation's new nacelle ring, in a borrowed work harness, arguing metallurgy with the gray-bearded engineer, whose name was Aldous Penn, and who had apparently decided that the proper response to a Drail shipmaster who asked intelligent questions was to teach her the entire fabrication doctrine of the human yards, which he proceeded to do for 3 days, with diagrams. Their voices carried across the yard at all hours. 2 professionals from species separated by 2 centuries of silence, discovering that the language of load tolerances is universal. The ledger preserves one exchange entire, because Collop, passing beneath, judged it material Tesk. This standard is triple what the rated stress requires. Nobody builds like this. It's waste. Penn, it's not waste, it's the margin. Rated stress is what you expect. The margin is for what you don't. We're a people who got caught once, Captain, exactly once, with no margin, at a place called Carrant, and you have seen what we keep there, so now you know what the margin is for. We don't build the extra strength into the ring because the ring needs it. We build it in because we do. And on the 9th day, the humans took Pel Sorvain to see the lights tended, because he had asked plainly person to person, in the manner the place required, and had therefore, to his own visible astonishment, been answered with yes. He went out on the tender with the duty crew, the glass left in its case again, and he stood the whole shift in the amber dark while the watch went down the Garland procession doing its 2-century-old work, cleaning, rewiring, relighting, reading aloud at certain lights flagged in the duty roster, the names in a line or two of the lives, because, the duty chief explained, matter of fact, harnessed to the bow of the 3rd dead ship with a polishing rig in her hands. A light you only maintain is a fixture. A light you still speak to is kept. They reached the new light at procession's end as the shift closed, the one inscribed in 2 scripts, and the duty chief consulted her roster and read aloud to the open dark, in the formal cadence the watch reserved for the spoken lines. Brockle Naus of Quarith Rigger, stranger to us, went into the fire so strangers to him would live. He put it out. Go rest. Then she initialed the roster, because the watch was also a working harbor and the shift was over, and the tender came about and went home toward the lit sprawl of the station. And Pel Sorvain rode the whole way back with his banded eyes closed, which for an oct is not sleep but its opposite, the refusal to let a single layer of a thing escape. It was that night, the 9th night, that he came to Glaine's quarters, unasked, and stood in the doorway filling it, and said, "Whatever you are planning, and you are planning, I have watched the budget moving behind your eyes since the council told you no. I ask you once here, where the asking means something. Let it go gray, Glaine, all of it. Go home with nothing, and tell them what you saw, voice and witness. The way the old stories crossed before there were cameras, the way that presenter of yours is already rehearsing in his cabin. I have heard him through the bulkhead. He weeps and starts over. It will be the finest work of his life. The galaxy does not need the picture. The galaxy needs the account. The picture is just the thing your trade sells when it doesn't trust the truth to carry." And Glaine, who had spent 9 days assembling the architecture of the temptation that Holt would name to his face on the morning of departure, looked at the only being who had ever kept him honest for money, and said, with the genuine regret of a man declining a beautiful and unaffordable thing, "The account doesn't service 11 million of debt, old friend. The picture does. Bill me for the sermon." It was the last conversation they had at Carrant Watch, and Collop, whose quarters shared the other bulkhead, wrote down one further line beneath the transcript of it, the only editorial remark in the whole ledger of the voyage. "He is going to fall at the last fence." Note that the humans appear to know this, and are, for reasons I do not yet grasp, preparing to let him take everyone with him to the place where falling teaches. 6 days later, the Ovation came out of the yard cradle whole. The humans had not merely repaired her, they had, with the absent thoroughness of a guild that could not help itself, corrected her trued her frames, rebedded her engines, replaced the slagged nacelle ring with one fabricated to a standard her builders had never met, and stenciled on the new ring, in small plain letters in two scripts, the line the whole yard had apparently agreed upon without any meeting being held, for the man who put it out. Tesk ran her hand along the stencil once and signed the yard chit and said nothing, because there was nothing in 9 years of rim running that had prepared her for a bill of repair, presented by the most feared species in the galaxy, itemized at no charge with the notation, "Castaway Law, you were guests, mind the shoal next time." They were 3 hours from departure, the escort tugs already standing off, when Provost Captain Adai Holt came aboard one final time, alone again, and asked for Glane, and met him in the saloon under the brass board which still carried, because nobody had had the heart or the nerve to touch it, Day 20, the monster. "I've brought you 2 things," she said. "The first is the manifest release. Everything you came with leaves with you, including 61 gray reels, which you'll keep, I hope, as souvenirs of an education." A pause that was not hesitation. She was a woman who paused only on purpose. "The second is a decision we made last night at the Watch Council after 200 years of declining, and you ought to know it was not unanimous, and that I argued against it." "What is it?" "A gift," Holt said, with teeth. She took from her coat a flat case of pale alloy, the size of a book, and set it on the saloon table and opened it. Inside, bedded in gray fabric, lay a single recording plate of human manufacture, mirror black, unmarked, and Glane, who had handled every recording medium ever sold in the lawful galaxy, did not recognize a single thing about it except its purpose, which it wore the way a key wears its lock. 200 years ago we withdrew our image from the galaxy," Holt said, "and we have never once regretted it, and we are not reversing it now, so hear precisely what this is. The Council has resolved that the account should be rendered once, not as a plea. We are not asking the galaxy's pardon, and we are certainly not asking its sympathy, which is, as you correctly observe, a currency, and we have seen what your markets do with it. As a record, spoken once plainly by the Watch, to be heard whole or not at all, on this plate is a statement, 11 minutes. I recorded it last night, because if it was going to be anyone's face, it was going to be the face of the one who argued no. That's how we do things here. It is the first consented image of a human being to leave our space in 200 years, and the conditions of the consent are inside the plate, and they are not negotiable because they enforce themselves. It plays whole, from first word to last, or it does not play. It cannot be cut, it cannot be quoted, it cannot be slowed, scored, captioned, or contexted, and if it is placed within another work, Master Glane, attend to this, because I can see the architecture of the Temptation building behind your eyes. Even now, if it is made to stand in any frame but its own, it will not merely decline, it will object. Object, Glane repeated. You've seen the courtesy decline, Holt said. You have not seen it object. Pray you never do. 60 crossings went home with gray reels in a story nobody believed. You'll go home with the only playable human image in the galaxy and the freedom to do absolutely anything you like with it. And that, Master Glane, is the gift and the teeth, and the Council believes, though I voted otherwise, the only honest test of what you learned at our anchorage. We watched you stand at the rail when we lit the lights for your rigger. We've read the inventory of your strong room, and we know to the frame what you have and what you'll be tempted to build with it. You came here to decide what the galaxy sees of us. Now you will, in fact, decide. One showman, one premier, the account of the garland in his hands. My colleagues call that justice. I call it gambling. She closed the case and slid it across the table to him and stood. Prove me wrong, impresario. I would so dearly love the paperwork. The crossing home took 19 days, and they were the quietest of Ottavar Glane's life. The escort left them at the hush line with neither ceremony nor signal, the black buoys sliding past the ports one by one, doing nothing forever, and Glane stood at the saloon glass and found that the nothing had changed its meaning entirely, that what had read on the way in as menace now read as a held breath. 11 light years of a species declining, with perfect manners, to be looked at by people who had not earned it, and he had the plate in his strong room and 61 gray reels and 40 hours of interior footage of his crew's faces at a window, and a magnate waiting at Korath who had paid 11 million for a monster, and the entire voyage home he sat with the brass board in front of him, turning the last card over and back. Day 20, the monster. He did not throw it away. Collop's ledger notes that he did not throw it away. Korath Hub came up out of the dark on the 40th day like a lit marquee, and the creditors were on the docks before the gangway sealed. It was worse than he had budgeted. The Ember Reach judgments had matured while he was gone. 2 of his sublensulas had been seized. The Combine's library was under lien, his offices sealed with the bonded wax of 3 separate courts, and the trade press, tipped by harbor clerks, met the ovation's birth in a shouting crescent, because the word was already moving through the hub like current through water, Glane came back. Glane crossed the line and came back, with his hull yard fresh and one man short and something in the strong room. He gave them 40 seconds of teeth and frill at the gangway, the old performance, every gesture a poster, and promised them the premiere of the age, and went up the hub alone to the high gallery offices of the House of Dree to face the only audience that had ever frightened him. Magnate Sermal Dree received him standing, which was a verdict in itself, with Collop's transmitted ledger glowing on the desk between them, every day of it, the forged waiver, the staging, the cascade, the funeral, the anchorage, all of it, in a clerk's passionless hand. 11 million. The magnate said, and my auditor sends me an itemized account of a religious experience. Where is my monster, Glane? There is no monster. There never was. What there is, Glane said and heard, with a strange, distant interest, the pitch assembling itself in his throat, smooth as ever. Smoother is better. Magnate, I have the only playable human recording in existence. I have the face of their border captain, consented, genuine, verifiable, 11 minutes of the most forbidden image in the galaxy. And I have 40 hours of authentic interior footage, real fire, real terror, real grief on the faces of a crew inside the Forbidden Zone, the only such material that has ever existed or ever will. 60 years of Guildcraft can build around those assets a picture that will outgross every entertainment ever mounted in this arm. The monster was always going to be a costume. Magnate, we both knew that when you bought your share. What I brought home instead is the one thing no costume has ever been. He leaned on the desk. True, the magnate said, tasting it. And in your professional judgment, impresario, what does true gross against monster? And there it was. The whole voyage, the names in the amber dark, the stenciled nacelle ring, the gray reels, the plate with its teeth, all of it funneled down to one question across one desk, asked by the holder of his debts. And Ottavir Glane stood at the fork of his entire life with the answer Holt had wagered against him already forming. And what he said was, monster grosses triple. He told himself, in the weeks that followed, that it was the debts. He told himself it was the 400 employees of the Combine, whose wages hung on the House of Dree's forbearance, the sub-licenses, the widows of the Ember Reach judgments, the entire architecture of obligation that a man builds around himself, precisely so that, at the moment of moral arithmetic, he can claim the sums were never his to choose. He told himself the humans had given him the plate knowing what he was, that Holt's wager only had meaning if losing it was possible, that an object lesson requires a demonstration, and a demonstration requires a stage, and no one in the galaxy built stages like Ottavir Glane. He was, after all, not going to suppress the statement. It would play, whole, every glorious minute exactly as consented, as the climax of the evening. That the 3 hours before it would assemble, from stage fire and shadow and auraless narration and the crew's real terrified faces recontexted, against survey chart mates, a forbidden zone of teeth and menace, a dead fleet of slaughtered warships, an unseen pursuer, a monster never shown and therefore never technically faked, and that the statement of Provost Captain Ade Holt would arrive in the final reel, recut by its placement into the confession of a warden at the gates of a horror. None of that, he told himself, touched the letter of the terms. It plays whole. It plays whole. He had read the consent conditions nightly like a man pressing a bruise. Pel Sorvain quit on the 17th day of post-production when he saw the assembly cut. He came out of the screening cell moving slowly, the way the heavy oct move when they wish to be sure of each step, and he found Glane in the gallery above the editing floor, where 40 guild cutters were laying stage bloomfire behind the real image of Omi Vida, thrown against a bulkhead, and he did not shout, which Glane had braced for and would have known how to fight. You were at the rail, Pel said. That is what I keep returning to. You stood at the rail at the funeral of your own man, in their light, and I watched your face, Glane, with eyes that see 11 layers, and grief was in every one of them. It was the single best-lit moment of your life. And this is the picture you cut from it. The bandit eyes turned, layer by layer, and fixed him. I asked you on Quarith not to make me light a fake. You have done worse. You are making the truth lie. Every frame in that assembly is genuine, and the whole is the largest fraud ever committed. And when it plays, the galaxy will believe of those people, the ones who sang over Brockle Nouse, the exact slander they have spent 200 years too dignified to answer. And the plate at the end. You think you have found the seam in their terms. 11 layers, Glane. I have looked at that plate. There is no seam. There is a patience, and you are spending the last of it. The terms say whole, Glane said. It plays whole. So does a hanged man, said Pel Sorvain, and took his glass and his apprentice, and left the Glane Spectacle Combine forever. The campaign that followed was the most expensive in the history of the entertainment trades, and Glane mounted it with the desperate brilliance of a being who knows that momentum is the only thing standing between himself and his own thoughts. He could not show a single frame of human space, and he turned the impossibility itself into the engine. The picture they tried to erase. The hoarding said, on 100 worlds over an image of nothing at all, a field of elegant gray with one black buoy silhouetted at its edge. He leaked, through channels 3 removes from the Combine, the true story that the expedition's exterior reels had been wiped by unknown forces inside the zone, and watched the trade press do his work for him, because nothing in the galaxy sells like confiscation. He confirmed nothing. He denied nothing. He appeared exactly twice in public during the 40 days, impeccable in a new coat, and said both times only that the galaxy would see what it had waited 200 years to see, and that he would say no more before the premiere. And the second time, a young press correspondent from a dockside ledger, sharper than her seniors, asked the question nobody else had thought to ask. Master Glane, your lens master quit, your presenter won't read for you, and your apprentice archivist stood outside these offices last week, handing out copies of an old trade-era fragment about something called the courtesy. If the picture is everything you say, why is everyone who was actually there walking away from it? And the recording of that moment, which survived because it was taken in lawful space where the light still obeyed money, shows Audemars Glane smile the poster smile, and open his mouth and close it, and stand for 2 full seconds with nothing coming out at all, before the press officers moved in, and beings who knew him swore afterward that those 2 seconds were the only honest appearance of the entire campaign. Vita came to him on the 38th day, the last of them to try. She had refused to surrender her exposure logs to the cutting floor, and the Combine's lawyers had taken them anyway, under the production contract her guild indenture bound her to, and she had not fought it in the courts, because she had spent her settlement instead on 60 seconds of his time, booked through his own appointment clerks under a false name, the only way left to reach him. She stood in the office where the whole voyage had been conceived, dwarfed by the model of the buoy line still on its brass column by the window, and she did not raise her voice, because she had learned at Carrant Watch what a level voice could carry. I cataloged every frame you're using, she said. I know the assembly better than your cutters do, so I'm not here to tell you it's a lie. You know it's a lie. You've priced the lie. That conversation is finished. I'm here to tell you the thing I think nobody else has said plainly, because Pell argues in light, and Aureli argues in grief, and the captain doesn't argue at all, and somebody owes you the plain arithmetic, and I'm an archivist. Plain arithmetic is the whole of my trade. She held up one small hand and counted on it. 13 pictures, Master Glane. 12 old ones, and the plate. That's still the entire archive of the only species in 2 centuries to be slandered by every civilization in the arm at once and answer with silence. You hold the 13th picture, the only consented one, the only one they ever chose to give, and you are going to spend it as the cherry on a horror show. It will play whole, yes, and it will play whole inside 3 hours of your architecture to an audience you will have spent the evening teaching what to see, and that where I trained is called the context of record, and it lasts forever. There will never be a 14th picture. They gave once, after 200 years, on the strength of 1 funeral and 1 man at a rail. When you do this, the door doesn't just close on you. It closes on the whole arm, for another 2 centuries, maybe for good, and the historians will write that the species that called itself the storytellers of the galaxy was handed the truest image ever entrusted to it, and could not let it simply be true. She lowered her hand. That's the bill, Master Glane. I've itemized it. You taught me that, you know. First week aboard. Everything has a price. You said the trick is to see the whole invoice before you sign. I'm the last line of your invoice. I came so you'd have seen it. For a long moment, the impresario looked down at the little archivist, and the office was so quiet that the hub's traffic could be heard murmuring. Under the floor, the way it had murmured the night he wrote 20 cards in square handwriting for a place he had never seen, and something moved behind his eyes that his press officers, watching from the doorway, could not name. And then it settled, the way a market settles. And he said gently, with what she would realize only years later was a kind of plea, the premiere is in 2 days, 11,000 seats. Do you know what it costs to stop a thing that size, child? And Vita, who had stood at the rail in the amber light and watched 26,000 names answer that exact question, yes, I do. It costs everything you have. They paid it 60 years at full asking price. I looked it up, and she bowed. The small formal bow a human girl with a drawing slate had taught her in a refectory, and left him alone with the model of the line. He worked through both remaining nights. The cutters, interviewed years afterward, all remembered the same detail, that in the final 2 days Glane recut nothing in the 3 hours of the picture, not 1 frame, but spent hour after hour alone in the screening cell with the final reel, the plates reel, running the consent terms on one screen and the 11 minutes on the other, over and over, the level voice of Ade Holt filling the cell deep into the watches of the night, while the most successful showman of his generation sat motionless, in the dark, pressing again and again on the one bruise his whole architecture stood on, the clause he had read nightly like scripture and never once read aloud. If it is made to stand in any frame but its own, it will not merely decline, it will object. On the last morning, the chief cutter asked him directly whether the plate placement was cleared, legally, technically, certainly. And Glane looked at her with the eyes of a man who had not slept in the same year as his own face, and gave the answer that Collop's ledger, even now, presents without comment, because no comment survives contact with it, it plays whole. Whole is the whole of the law, and if I'm wrong, and here the record shows he paused, and straightened the unpaid collar of the new coat, then at least the objection will be the largest single audience in galactic history, and nobody will be able to say the humans weren't given the stage to make it on. Roll the masters, we open tonight. Which is, of all the sentences Audemars Glane ever spoke, the one his biographers still argue over, whether it was bravado or blindness, or whether, in the locked arithmetic of a man who could not afford the truth and could no longer quite bear the lie, some bankrupt remainder of the boy outside the tent had done the only sum left to him, and concluded that if he could not choose to let the account be rendered, he could at least build the hall and sell the seats, and put the harbor master's voice in front of 11,000 witnesses, and let the people who kept the lights decide what the evening was for. The humans, Collop had written at Carrant, appear to know this, and are preparing to let him take everyone with him to the place where falling teaches. The auditor never claimed to have understood the sentence when he wrote it. He claimed only ever after that on the night of the premiere, watching what happen, he had felt less like a witness to a catastrophe than like a man seeing a very old, very patient piece of engineering, built by shipwrights who always allowed for the margin, finally take its load. The premiere of the Forbidden Zone. What the humans are hiding was mounted 40 days later in the grand auditorium of the Mirror Exchange, 11,000 seats, sold through in 9 minutes, with simultaneous carriage on every licensed channel in the spiral arm, and gray market relays running to 3 more, the largest single audience, the trade press settled afterward, ever assembled for any work of entertainment in galactic history, which meant, though no one in the hall yet understood the bookkeeping, that the account of the Long Garland was at last to be rendered before a crowd of appropriate size. Glane watched the first 2 hours from the impresario's box with the magnate at his shoulder, and they were, he knew with the cold connoisseurship of 50 years, the finest work of his life. The hall did everything he had built it to do. It gasped at the crossing of the hush line, the black buoys vast and mute in frame spell had shot before the gray, the only exterior images that had survived, because they had been taken in lawful space of the border itself. It shrieked, 11,000 voices in the dark at the stage run, the bloom fire, Vita against the bulkhead, Tesk's flat voice calling the cascade, all of it real, every frame of it true, and every minute of it a lie. It wept at the funeral sequence, which he had rebuilt from narration and mat work since no images of it existed, the unseen graves described in a hired voice over slow amber abstractions, a memorial, the Chiron suggested, to the victims of the zone, and the hall, primed by 2 hours of dread, understood the lights to be the headstones of the human's prey, and mourned deliciously the wrong dead. In the dark of the box, Audemars Glane listened to 11,000 beings believing him, and waited to feel the thing this feeling had always been, and found that the account of it would not balance no matter how he carried the figures, and that his hands on the rail of the box were cold. Then the final reel, and the plate. He had staged its entrance with all his craft. The screen went to black. The hall voice, his own, recorded, intoned the words 40 days ago inside the zone. Their warden gave us a message for you, and the hush that fell then was the deepest sound an auditorium can make. 11,000 beings inhaling at once before the first consented human image in 200 years. The plate played. Ade Holt's face came up on the great screen, 60 years old, scarred through the eyebrow, deep water coat, the saloon of the Ovation behind her, and she looked out at the grand auditorium of the Mirror Exchange with the level patience of a harbor master logging weather, and said, "My name is Ade Holt. I keep the watch at Carrant, where my people's dead are anchored. I am going to tell you, once, what happened to us, and what we decided, and why your maps go quiet at our border. Nothing in this account asks for your sorrow. We finished our mourning a long time ago. We simply find after 2 centuries that a record ought to exist in your space as it exists in ours, because we are a people of records, and because a lie left standing too long begins to bear weight." And for 1 minute and 40 seconds, it was exactly what the consent had promised, and the hall sat in absolute stillness while she told them about 9 gentle ships and 26,040 souls, and a fire that ran the convoy spine faster than families could be woken, and 11 hours of distress calls broadcast in the clear. It was when she reached the words, "and they came," and the hall, conditioned by 3 hours of Glaine's architecture, leaned into the arrival of the monster at last, that the frame Glaine had built around her finished closing, and the courtesy, which had been weighing his work since the first Chiron, with a patience 200 years deep, objected. It did not flicker. Later, every channel engineer in the spiral arm would testify to that with the same unsettled awe. No fault signature, no signal event, nothing on any meter. The image of Adai Holt simply continued speaking while everything Ottavara Glaine had wrapped around her died. The score, his slow dread strings beneath her voice, faded out like breath off a window. The Chiron bar dissolved to gray. And then, in 11,000 seats and across every carrying channel in the arm at once, the 3 hours that had preceded her, every staged frame, every mat, every recontexted face, every honest image conscripted into the great fraud, grade in the archives and the masters and the gray market relays, in the wet memory of the projection cores, evenly, smoothly, without malice, the way a tide takes back what was lent, until the only image in the possession of the largest audience in galactic history was a 60-year-old human woman telling the truth in a frame that now belonged entirely to her. In the projection gallery, the chief engineer had his hand on the hall kill switch and his eyes on the impresario's box, waiting for the signal every showman in that situation would give, because a premiere bleeding out in public can still be triaged. The feed cut, the refunds promised, the narrative seized by morning, an attack, a sabotage, the human sorcery assaulting honest entertainment. The trade press would have printed it. The galaxy, trained by 200 years of folklore, would have believed it. Standing in the box with his life's work graying in the cores beneath him, Ottavara Glaine ran the arithmetic of his own salvation in the time it took the engineer's hand to settle on the switch, and found that he had, at some point between a funeral and a premiere, without ever scheduling it, stopped being able to afford the lie. "Let it finish," he said. The magnate turned. "Glaine, let it finish," said Ottavara Glaine, in a voice the whole box heard. The voice not of the pitch but of the man underneath it, hoarse and level. "Or I will go down to the gallery and break the hand of anyone who touches that switch. We are going to attend, magnate, once in our lives, all of us. Sit down." And the galaxy attended. "And they came," said Adai Holt, "to 11,000 silent beings and the uncounted watching dark beyond them. And what came was not rescue. We were 11 hours burning. The rescue authorities of 6 jurisdictions spent 9 of those hours in dispute over transit rights, and that was cowardice and paperwork, and we have long since let it go. But the others, the swift ones, the ones who broke every speed record in the lanes that day, they came to watch. They sold seats. Our children burned before a paying audience of better than 900 million, with commentary, and when our fleet reached the convoy at last, our boat steered first for the brightest lights, believing them survivor beacons, and found the grandstand. I am going to say the next part slowly, because it is the only sentence of judgment in this account, and we waited 200 years to say it only once. What was done to us in our worst hour was not done by monsters. Monsters would have been a mercy, because monsters cannot help themselves. It was done by an industry, by audiences, by a market that had decided our grief was content, and every being in it could have helped themselves, and none of them did, so we did. The image held level, unhurried. We did not take revenge. You have noticed that, in 200 years of inventing teeth for us, you have never once been able to name a thing we actually did to you. Here is the whole of it. We bought our dead back. Every frame, every artifact, every license, at your own asking prices for 60 years, until the last reel of our burning children was ours, and then we went home and shut the door. The quiet at our border that your folklore has spent 2 centuries populating with horrors is this, and only this: we withdrew our consent. We are not hiding from you. We are declining you. We built into the very light of our space the simple custom you could not be trusted to keep, that a people's image belongs to them, that grief is not a commodity, that no one's children are content. You have felt it tonight, working. I am told the gentleman who carried this recording home built a monster around me. I expect, if you are seeing my face at all, that his monster is gray. That is not punishment. Nothing we do is punishment. It is only ever the same single sentence, said as gently as physics permits, not without asking. Somewhere in the 11,000, a being began to weep, and was not alone, and the recording did not care, because it had not asked them to. I will close the account then. To the descendants of those who watched, we do not hold you to your grandsire's tickets. Debts of that kind are not heritable, or we would never have crawled out from under our own history, and we know it. The line stays, not as your punishment, but as our preference. We like our quiet, we have our work, the watch is kept and the lights are tended, and we are, you may be relieved to learn, content in there, in a way your broadcast never imagined and could not have sold. We ask nothing of you. But if a day comes when your ships approach our buoys not with cameras hidden in their collars, but with a plain request, plainly made, person to person, the way one asks anything of a neighbor, you will discover what 60 crossings discovered, and none of them believed, that the door was never locked. It was only ever closed, and we have been on the other side of it the whole time, finishing our morning, hoping, with no particular urgency, that the galaxy would one day grow old enough to knock. A day Holt looked out of the frame for one moment more, at all of them, the way a harbor master looks down a long registry of ships. My name is Adai Holt, she said. 26,040 names are anchored at Carent, and every one of them is lit tonight, and none of them is for sale. This account is closed. Good night. The screen went to its own black cleanly on its own terms. The plate had played whole. And in the grand auditorium of the Mirror Exchange, before the largest audience in the history of galactic entertainment, nothing followed it. No score swelled because the score was gray. No Chiron mediated because the Chirons were gray. No voice told 11,000 beings what they had just seen or how to feel about what they had just seen or what would be shown to them next. And the silence that stood up in that hall then was of a kind no auditorium in the spiral arm had ever been permitted to contain. The silence of an audience entirely, helplessly, unprofitably alone with a true thing. It lasted 4 minutes. The house records, which survived, show that no one left. The collapse of the Glane Spectacle Combine took 11 days, which the trade press called swift and fine collop, who administered it, called overdue. The House of Dree foreclosed on the morning after the premiere, as it was entitled to do, as the terms had always said it would, and magnate Shermel Dree, who had paid $11 million for a monster and received instead a mirror with her own. Grandsire's ticket stubs in it was observed by her staff to be strangely unvindictive about the whole affair. She took the library, the licenses, the offices, the name. The famous coat Glane handed across the desk himself, folded, with the button lens still sewn in the collar, and the remark, recorded by Collop because Collop recorded everything, that she should mind the collar, as it had a history of taking things that weren't his. 2 decisions of those 11 days passed almost unnoticed at the time and are now, in the histories, nearly the whole of what the Combine is remembered for. The first was Glane's last act as its master. He refunded the premiere. All of it, 11,000 seats and every carriage fee on every channel, out of the wreckage of his personal accounts, with a notice over his own signature that read, in full, "You purchased an evening's entertainment. You received instead a true thing, which cannot be sold, and so your money is returned." The Combine regrets the 3 hours. It does not regret the 11 minutes. The second was Collop's last act as auditor. The ledger of the voyage, complete, unedited, from the forge waiver to the kill switch, was deposited in the public record of 3 courts, where any being could read it, and millions did, and no court in the spiral arm ever found a charge to bring that fit what it described, because the laws of the lawful galaxy, it turned out, had words for forgery and fraud and reckless operation of a charter vessel, and no words at all for what had actually happened out there, which was that a man had been shown the difference between an audience and a witness, too late, in front of everyone. The statement of Adai Holt could not be cut, quoted, scored, or framed, and so the galaxy, helpless, did with it the one thing the terms permitted. It passed it on whole. Within a year there was no inhabited world in the spiral arm where it had not played. It was carried by channels that charged nothing for it, because every attempt to attach an advertisement, grade the advertisement, a discovery that cost 3 networks dearly and delighted everyone else. It played in guild halls and parliaments, in academy lecture cells and dockside taverns, at the funerals of spacers 11 minutes whole every time, and a generation of beings grew up able to recite the harbor master cadences of it the way their grandsires had been able to hum the dread strings of the anniversary specials which no one ever aired again. The trade era textbooks were not rewritten all at once. Institutions are slow, and shame is slower. But the phrase "the most watched hour in galactic history" changed its referent within a decade, quietly, the way the meaning of a border had changed one night in the Mirror Exchange, and the new referent could not be sold, sampled, or interrupted, and the old one was never spoken of in public again by anyone who wished to keep an audience. The guilds moved faster than the textbooks. 11 months after the premiere, the assembled licensing authorities of the spiral arm adopted into the foundational code of every recording profession of provision known formally as the Image Sovereignty Accord and universally as the Carent Rule, that the image of a sentient being or its dead belongs first to that being, that consent is not a formality but the title itself, and that no claim of news, art, history, or commerce overrides it. The rule was every licensing authority admitted, unenforceable by any technology the lawful galaxy possessed. They adopted it anyway. It was the first law in galactic history passed in open imitation of the species everyone had spent 2 centuries refusing to imitate, and the oldest member of the drafting Congress, asked by the press why the arm should bind itself with a custom it could not police, gave the answer that went onto the wall of every guild hall in the trade. Because we have now seen what a people becomes who keep it, and what we became when we did not. As for the crew of the Ovation, the histories kept track of them with the special tenderness reserved for beings who were present at a hinge. Vasht Orel never recorded again. He toured instead for 30 years, hall to hall across 100 worlds, no cameras permitted at the door, attendance only, and told them live, with his sax trembling and his voice unamplified, the buoys, the names, the funeral, the gray. He called the program an account, plainly rendered, and he opened every performance the same way, with his old script from Quorith held up before the crowd and then laid down on the stage boards, and he closed every performance the same way too, with the sentence that became in time more quoted than any narration of his celebrated career. I was the most trusted voice in the spiral arm, and the humans taught me the difference between being trusted and being true, and they taught it without raising theirs. Captain Marutesk paid off the bank in 4 years, hauling on his survey charters along the rim with a nacelle ring that never once faulted and a stencil she never painted over. She filed every standard year on the anniversary of the Cascade, a single-line addendum to her ship's log, in the clear on the common channels addressed to no one. Ovation, sound and trading. Still minding the shoal. Thank you. She received no reply and expected none and filed it anyway for 41 years, and when she died, the Yard Guild of Quorith found in her effects a bill of repair, itemized at no charge, framed. Vida became the keeper of the galaxy's smallest and most visited archive. 1 room, dockside, Quorith hub, containing 13 images. 12 were the old verified photographs of humanity, the trade era, the war congresses, the one nobody could date. The 13th was the statement of Adai Holt, playing whole, on a loop, 11 minutes, forever. She cataloged it with the dry precision Pell had trained into her. Image 13, consented. She lived long enough to see her 1 room copied on 400 worlds, and she told every apprentice she ever trained the thing she had told a frill-collared impresario on the first night of a doomed voyage, which was carved, eventually, over the door of the Guild Academy itself. If the archive of a whole people is 13 pictures, you had better not have lied in any of them. Pell Survain went home to the funerals. He was asked, of course, constantly, to every end of his long life, to make the picture of the voyage, the honest one, the masterwork only he could light, and he declined every commission with the same unhurried words. It was attended. That is enough. He shot grief on 40 more worlds, and weddings now too, and harvests, and 1 celebrated reel of dock children playing a ball game against Bulkhead, and beings who studied his late period swore the light in it had changed, had grown somehow both colder and kinder, though no instrument could say how, and he never spoke of Carent, except once, drunk on guild wine at the retirement of a colleague, when he said, I saw a place where the light is governed, and it is governed the way light always wanted to be. Ask before you take. That is the entire technology. We could have had it for nothing, any of us, any time these 1,000 years. And Ottavar Glane kept a theater. 1 room, the dockside levels, Quorith hub, 4 streets down from Vida's archive, in what had been a Chandler's stockroom. 60 seats, a single projector, no marquee. It showed 1 program twice an evening, free. The program was 11 minutes long. He took no tickets, the man who had taken tickets since boyhood. He stood at the door instead, smaller without the coat, grayer every year, and held it open and said the same thing to every being who came, spacer or magnate or child, the words that the dockside came to know by heart and say along with him, come in, sit anywhere. You are not an audience tonight, you are a witness. There is a difference, and it will cost something, and it is the most expensive thing in the galaxy. He never crossed the hush line again. He never applied to. But twice a year, by the refuse convoy, by whatever agreement older than anyone's grandmother governed such things, there came to the 1 room theater a plain message plate, gray alloy, human manufacture, bearing always a single line in a level hand. The first one, the year of the collapse, read, You lost the wager. I filed the paperwork anyway. He kept them all in a drawer of the projection desk. 4 decades of them, Tersa's harbor logs. The lights were bright last night. The watch changed crews. Your rigger's light is tended. The children of the station leave their game and stand still when they pass it. You may tell his people that, if he had people. And the last one, which arrived the winter the old impresario did not get up from the projection desk, and which Vida, who found him, read aloud to the 60 quiet seats because there was no one else to read it to, said only, They tell me beings line up at your door in the cold to see 11 true minutes, and stand in silence after, and come back with their children. old showman. Do you finally see? It was never the picture they were starving for. They named nothing after him. He had asked that nothing be. The theater runs to this day under Vita's Guild, one room among 400 worlds of one rooms, and the program has never changed and never lengthened. And that, the dockside will tell you, is the whole point and the whole memorial. That it does not escalate, that it is not improved upon, that no one has ever found a way to make it bigger. Because true things come in their own size. The hush line is still there. That is the part visitors to the rim always ask about, and the rim always answers the same way. Still there, still black, still silent, the buoys doing nothing, forever, the door closed and the quiet kept. Nothing comes out but the refuse convoy, and twice a year, a few gray plates with single lines on them. Nothing goes in at all. The galaxy has stopped sending cameras. It took a generation, and then another, but it stopped. Not because the gray defeated the last of the smugglers, though it did, but because somewhere along the years the wanting changed, the way Holt's 11 minutes said it might. The rim's children, raised on a harbor master's level voice instead of their grandsire's invented teeth, do not speak of what the humans are hiding. They speak carefully, the way one speaks of neighbors whose porch light is visible across a valley, of what the humans are keeping, and when their elders tell the old horror stories, the children correct them with the merciless accuracy of the young. Nothing is hiding in there. People are living in there. They have a harbor and a yard and bread and a ball game against a bulkhead and 26,040 lights that are never allowed to go dark. And they asked us, as gently as physics permits, to knock. No one has knocked yet. Ships slow sometimes at the rim of the quiet. Long-haul captains dim their running lights passing the buoys, a courtesy answering a courtesy, a custom no law requires and every crew keeps. Academy cadets on their first border run are taken to the observation glass by old officers and shown the 11 light years of nothing, and told the whole account, plainly, the funeral and the premiere and the 4 minutes no one left, and then they are told the thing the galaxy took 200 years and one ruined showman to learn, the thing that is always said at that glass. Quietly, like a hand laid flat on a ship's spine, the door was never locked. It is only closed, and they are on the other side of it, tending their lights, finishing nothing, for they finished long ago, waiting with no particular urgency for the rest of us to grow old enough to ask. Plainly for what we want and to want at last something worth the asking. On that day, the old officers say, the buoys will do, for the first time in all their centuries, something. Until then, the galaxy keeps its distance the way one keeps a promise, and the quiet beyond the hush line is not the quiet of a monster sleeping, whatever the last of the old stories mutter. It is the quiet of a porch light across a valley. It is the quiet of a people who said not without asking and meant it, and were strong enough in the end that the whole wide-watching galaxy put down its cameras and lowered its voice, and learned to stand outside the closed door of the only species that ever refused to be a show, holding its one true picture, 11 minutes long, like a lamp.